Hello, this is America, and that is the notorious Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center, deep in the Florida Everglades. We are in the middle of nowhere. Now, this place has faced legal challenge after legal challenge, and now, nearly a year after it was constructed, it is reportedly about to close. Is it a sign of a shift in the administration's approach to immigration? If it is, what does that mean comes next? We've got so much more to unpack on this from here in Florida. But first, let's head to where that immigration policy is run from, Washington, D.C. In our studio there, Rob Matherson.
Thanks, Phil. Now, it wasn't long ago that images of ICE immigration raids in American cities were causing almost daily outrage. Images like these. Los Angeles troops and police on the streets confronting protesters, defending undocumented migrants at risk of deportation. The same again in Chicago. Heavily armed police clashing with protesters after mass ICE raids in the city. The Supreme Court later banned National Guard deployment to the area. They've been instructed to target protesters at ICE facilities. And then earlier this year, Minnesota. Heavy military equipment, furious demonstrators swathed in tear gas, people shot and killed. Now, ICE is said to be changing its tactics. It's still carrying out the raids, but they're less public, and there's more training for agents. So will those images of deaths and riots and frightened families still linger with American voters during the midterms in November as they haunt migrants living within the U.S. today?
I am very scared. In fact, ever since the raids began, ever since ICE came here in Kerr County, I'm always scared. And when I go out to the street, I look around everywhere.
I hope that after 4 years, another president will come who thinks differently than Donald Trump.
There are no words, there just aren't any, because you see your children suffer, wanting to go out for an ice cream, and as a father, even if you want to, you can't. There simply aren't words.
Well, the crackdown on immigrants is being driven by the White House and the man in charge, Donald Trump, who has spoken for many years in very strong terms about immigration to the U.S. as both president and candidate.
The real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places. We have thousands of murderers that came in. They're going to murder people. They already have murdered people in our country.
Right, too.
And we're going to get them a beautiful flight back to where they came from.
Richard Gaisford is at the White House for us. Richard, talk us through the Trump administration's policy on immigration now.
Yeah, well, controlling immigration is one policy, a campaign promise that Donald Trump has managed to keep because he's managed to get this country to negative net migration, Rob, for the first time in at least half a century. And he's done that by effectively, strict enforcement, but also making it really difficult for people to live here and then through mass deportation as well. The figures from the White House are quite stark. It shows since Donald Trump came into office in January 2025, more than 605,000 people have effectively been pushed out of the country, but 1.9 million others, it's believed, have left voluntarily, fearing what has been happening to others and wanting to get out. And that is, of course, because the number of ICE agents, these Immigration Customs Enforcement agents, has been increased dramatically by more than 120%. At the same time, they've been strengthening the border, triple the number of troops on the border that Joe Biden had, some 7,500 there now on the southern border, stopping people from coming in and changing policies as they go. Just last week, we had a policy announcement that anyone wanting a green card that's currently in the country will have to make an application from their home country. They'll have to leave to make that application. That could make it very difficult indeed. And it's not without its critics, even from within the Make America Great Again ranks. You see an awful lot of stories around about farmers, builders in particular, watching their workforce being decimated by these ICE raids. But at the moment, it seems President Trump here in the White House unaffected by that. It's more the policy of pushing people out that he's in favor of.
That's Richard Gaisford outside the White House for us. Well, the notorious detention center known as Alligator Alcatraz in Florida is expected to close in the coming days. The site held migrants rounded up by the Trump administration's ICE crackdown. It's been heavily criticized for alleged mistreatment of detainees. It's said some were even punished by being held in a cage measuring just 2 feet by 2 feet. From the center, deep in the Everglades, Phil Lavelle reports.
As far as guards go, they got the headlines and the horror. The alligators that give Alligator Alcatraz its name. This notorious detention center sprung up within days last year on a remote airstrip in the Florida Everglades, miles from anywhere.
People get out, there's not much waiting for them other than alligators and pythons.
Announced with a slick video on social media. Production quality akin to a Hollywood movie trailer.
As I call it, Alligator Alcatraz.
But very little in the way of happy endings here, just lots of stories of alleged mistreatment and despair.
I cried a lot.
Like Heidi's. She's asked us to hide her boyfriend's identity, but not his story.
He was in Alligator Alcatraz for 4 months, picked up by ICE.
The conditions he described behind those gates.
I wouldn't treat my dogs this way. There's only 3 toilets. There's no privacy for that. There's cameras above the toilets. There's people there that are yelling and screaming just because of the trauma of being there. And
eventually, Heidi found out he had been deported, but not back to his home country. There is a conflict there, so he ended up in Europe. Will he try and come back to the US?
We'll see. I mean, I hope so. We're gonna do what we can.
Amnesty International spoke to former detainees who described overflowing toilets with fecal matter, lights on 24/7, some detainees being held in a 2-foot by 2-foot cage as punishment, shackled with little water and exposed to the elements, including Florida's brutal humidity and mosquitoes. But the outrage about this place seems to have spurred its sponsors on. Take a look at this, for example. Official government social media posted a meme of alligators dressed as ICE agents. Then there was the sale by local Republicans of Alligator Alcatraz merch. The President, Donald Trump, himself came here to tour this facility as it opened.
We have a lot of bodyguards and a lot of cops that are in the form of alligators. You don't have to pay them so much.
Protesters have held vigils outside for months, including Ariane, every week for her dad.
Been under ICE detention since
held at Alligator Alcatraz for 6 months. ICE arrested him at a routine immigration appointment and took him there. Then earlier this month, he was suddenly released. You can see the smiles. They didn't last long. See, we were actually supposed to be interviewing Ariane today, and she called us a short while ago in tears and told us that she'd actually found her father slumped and unresponsive, and he'd been rushed to the emergency room at hospital. She says he has a number of medical conditions, like diabetes, for example, which she claims was not managed here, and his health has really deteriorated. She described how he needed an MRI, but doctors couldn't do it because he was wearing an ankle monitor. On top of that, because he's at hospital, not at home where he's supposed to be, the entire family is terrified that ICE will turn up and take him away again. There is no doubt that President Trump's controversial immigration policy is undergoing a public makeover.
These are immigration and customs enforcement officers.
Ads airing during the Super Bowl earlier this year to reframe ICE officers as friendly neighbors and Little League baseball coaches. President Trump even backing renaming ICE to NICE. That's National Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Few here would say there was anything nice about Alligator Alcatraz, a temporary site that they would argue was here way too long. Phil Lavelle, Al Jazeera, outside Alligator Alcatraz in the Florida Everglades.
Well, we're joined now by Scott Shuchart, the former head of policy at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Douglas Heye, Republican strategist. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for being with us on Al Jazeera. Douglas, I want to come to you first. We saw there that there is a rebranding that's going on of ICE at the moment, but I want to ask you, why do you think the Trump administration initially felt the need to give the approach towards immigration a much more aggressive image?
I think if we look back at the 2024 election, one of the things that Trump ran on was the video that we all saw time and time again of people just coming across the border at their own free will. And he vowed to put an end to that. And so what we see with Trump is he tries to demonstrate using very sharp teeth, very sharp claws, early and often. And that's what we saw there. Obviously, this has gone way overboard with what we saw in Minnesota, most especially. And Trump has faced a real backlash on this politically, even within his own party. It's very hard for most Republicans. Some will always find a way to defend anything that Donald Trump does. But a lot of them were very uncomfortable with the images and the videos that they saw in Minnesota. That caused real backlash within the administration.
Scott, there was an impression for people watching outside the country that during this particular time, ICE was essentially being used as a tool of the Trump administration, that it was almost at some point an offshoot from it. Do you think that that was something that ICE bought into, or did you think that this caused problems within the organization?
Can I say both? I think with ICE and CBP, there was an effort to elevate elements that were supportive of the president's political agenda. This clown, Greg Bovino, right, was escalated to some made-up field marshal position that had never existed before. It was clear that Secretary Noem and Corey Lewandowski, this free agent who was working for her, were picking and choosing favorites within the agency, elevating some people, pushing other people out. And so ICE and CBP were in the position of being treated like the president's private army. I think there have always been elements within the agencies that are supportive of a Trumpy kind of approach, and there are always elements within the agencies that are much more professional and interested in doing the job the right way. I think it's an interesting question whether the more professional element has been able to execute or whether it's been drowned out.
I want to come on to the way that Americans are viewing this, because I mean, polls are showing that Americans are broadly agreed that the US does have to have immigration controls, but that is how it's done is being the part that divides voters, particularly along party lines. Here's Alex Baird with a breakdown.
So how is the American public gauging President Trump's immigration crackdown? Well, in the latest polling released last week by Quinnipiac University, 40% of people across the political spectrum gave the thumbs up. Well, that number is masking the huge gulf between the left and the right in this country. When you break those opinions down by party, registered Republican voters overwhelmingly back the president. Just 13% say they disapprove. But turn to the Democrats and the difference is mammoth. A 97% disapproval rating. And that deep split across American society is evident when you hear voters explain it for themselves.
Not all undocumented immigrants cross the border here illegally. A lot of them simply fell off because of how unforgiving the U.S. immigration system is.
Leave ICE alone. America has every right to deport illegal immigrants from our country. Every single country on earth deports illegal immigrants.
This is not about border security anymore. This is about making immigration so punishing and unstable that even legal immigrants are treated like they don't belong.
I support immigrants who want to come to a country simply to better a life for themselves and for their family.
If the parents came here illegally and they brought their child here illegally, right, send them all back.
Immigrants come over to America and they destroy it. They crush it because they know how lucky they got it. A lot of times Americans don't. They become so entitled that they just don't have any fight left in them.
Despite all of that, when Americans were actually asked what concerns them the most didn't point to immigration at all, just 7%. The economy and preserving American democracy rising far above all the rest.
Douglas, given the fact that the figures that we saw there just in Alex's report, it's clear that immigration for Americans is pretty way down the list when it comes to the priorities in terms of the run-up to the midterms. But nevertheless, there is a focus on changing that image. Do you think that the change is in response to how voters had reacted to the images of what we saw in Los Angeles or Minneapolis? Or do you think there's a broader acknowledgement that the whole way that it was carried out was simply wrong?
Well, you'll never get a public acknowledgement on that from Donald Trump, obviously. But when Trump changes personnel, he's changing policy. And clearly, he saw the same images that we saw. His administration saw those. And the backlash that he got privately from members of Congress, whether that was directed at Kristi Noem or Greg Bovino, it caused a change in personnel. And Trump, you serve at Donald Trump's pleasure. And we learn who's out of Trump's favor when they get fired. And so that has been, I think, the big shift. Policies still remain in place, but how they're being enforced is very different now versus just a few months ago. And as those images don't appear on our TV screens constantly as they were in the winter, that means the issue falls on the level of priorities. If we saw something like Minnesota happen again, that issue would rise. It wouldn't be 7%. It would be back at like 27%. And there's bad news and bad news for Trump here. Yes, his numbers are terrible on immigration, but it's a low number because his numbers are terrible on pretty much everything else, starting with the economy. And that's what's driving this election at this point.
Scott, do you think just because the profile of immigration crackdown has changed and it's been, to a certain extent, downgraded, do you think that's affected the level of intensity that we're seeing in terms of the way that the policy is being carried out?
Well, the agenda gets driven by the news media, it gets driven by political opponents, and it gets driven by real people. Last week, not ICE, but USCIS, the legal immigration arm of DHS, announced that they're basically out of the business of approving green cards, of adjustment of status to green cards for people who are here on visas. That everyone who's been working here on an H-1B, everyone who's been working here legally on a visa, millions of people who productively contribute to the economy, who are married to U.S. citizens and so forth, are going to have to go back home and sit there for years waiting to adjust. If that happens, that's going to affect many families whose loved ones haven't been shot in the back by ICE in Minnesota, whose families haven't been crashed into by ICE cars in Chicago, and I don't know what that's going to do to public opinion.
I want to talk to you about the people who are going to be carrying out these policies. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they've been under scrutiny for their recruitment and then their training of new ICE agents. The DHS reportedly planned to spend $100 million in ICE recruitment in 1 year. They've also been accused of using racially charged imagery in recruitment. They're also reported to be using geofencing to target people who attended gun shows and UFC fights, as well as those who show an interest in tactical gear. Now, the DHS has reportedly cut 240 hours from its 584-hour training program for ICE candidates. That's eliminating or reducing training in the legal standard for use of force and arrests. They cut firearms training by about 16 hours and training on the rights of protesters reportedly cut from about 2 hours total to just 10 minutes. I understand also that when it came to the initial recruitment program, agents were offered, or those who wanted to enlist, offered $50,000 bonuses. There were age minimums that were reduced. Superman was used as part of the recruitment in advertising. Now, do you think in terms of the political messaging at the time was essentially that there were no rules? How do you think that influenced the kind of people that joined ICE at that point?
Well, I will say in the administration's defense, I have heard that they are going to be restoring a lot of the cut training under Secretary Mullen. But it was clear that the idea was to bring in everyone and anyone, people who would not have been hired under previous hiring standards. Now, some of that involves bringing in people who'd already retired, sucking in people who had good jobs with local law enforcement, bringing them into federal law enforcement. But as you say, lowering educational standards, lowering training standards, I think it's a little insulting to everybody who's in professional law enforcement to suggest that no real training is needed, to suggest that you can walk in off the street the day you turn 18 with no qualifications. And I would hope that we're going to see a continued turn back towards professionalism.
Scott, the images that we've been seeing of troops in military vehicles and a heavy police presence on the streets, Douglas, I'm going to come to you with this actually. It seemed to equate immigration with crime, and that is a really strong image. I mean, how much is that worrying Republicans, do you think, heading into the midterms?
I don't think it worries them. This is Donald Trump's rhetoric from day one. You know, when he took that escalator ride down in Trump Tower, this was a big part of what his founding message was as a candidate, and it's been true for 10 years. And you know, when I see geolocating of gun shows and UFC sites, I hear the Trump base. You know, we could geolocate at the White House in a couple of weeks when there's going to be a UFC fight. So it's not surprising that that's sort of the talent pool, as you would, that they're trying to draw in. He wants to remake the federal government to look like him. That's how he does it.
Scott, what is the risk, do you think, that by reducing the profile of ICE and reducing the profile of the raids that are carried out, subsequently there might be abuses that might, as a result of that, be shielded more from the public eye?
Well, the administration has done everything it can to avoid accountability. It illegally closed all of the independent oversight offices within DHS that used to do inspections of detention facilities that would have investigated unlawful shootings and that sort of thing. So I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to do anything to ensure that we do have transparency. But at the same time, I think it was 2 weeks ago that Tom Homan, the de facto head of ICE, was saying, you ain't seen stuff yet that mass deportations are still coming. His buddy Dave Venturella, who spent years working for the private prison company GEO, is now going to be in charge of ICE as of the end of this month. And if you look at the president's stock purchase disclosures, he just bought more stock in GEO. So the consolidation, the alignment between the immigration agencies and the private prison companies that supply them looks set only to ramp up, and that is a closed circle to block accountability and transparency. Absolutely.
Douglas, I just want to run through the comparison that we have, because we're talking a lot about the Trump administration, but it's no surprise that immigration deportation is happening. It happened under Joe Biden. It happened under Obama as well. Large-scale deportation isn't anything new. There are millions that have been forced to leave the country under both Democratic and Republican presidents. Over George W. Bush's presidency, 2 million people were deported over 8 years. Then, under Barack Obama's 8 years in office, 3 million people were removed. Now, in Trump's first term, which was 4 years, about 1.5 million people were deported. That's on track with Obama. And in Joe Biden's 4-year term, 1.1 million people were deported. Douglas, do you think that the Republicans will use this as a rationale that their approach has been correct, that they have, the numbers are down, there are fewer people coming into the country, and it has something that has always happened and on a similar scale? But I wanted to ask you, one of the contributing factors, is it that the countries from where people would be coming from, Venezuela, Mexico, for example, now are in a period of stability comparable to what they had before, that basically there is less of a reason for people to leave these countries and come to the US than there was before? Do you think that that's a factor in the number of reductions?
That's a factor. And the images. The images that we've all seen are designed to be seen in Mexico and Venezuela and Honduras to scare people from coming here. So it's a bit of a push and pull on both sides of it. And Trump said, I think about a month or two ago, he said, nobody talks about the border anymore because I fixed it. In a sense, that's true. And if you want to run on an accomplishment and you've solved a problem in Washington, is when you solve a problem, nobody focuses on solving the problem because it's been solved. And for Trump, he wants to highlight the success that he's had at the border. The challenge is that also comes with images that turn off so many independent voters. And if we talk about large-scale deportations, if I'm David Valadao, at a very at-risk congressional seat in the Central Valley of California, very immigrant-heavy for agricultural workers, temporary workers, those images scare my voters.
Well, and if I can, right, part of the numbers you showed are reflective of the fact that crashing the economy with COVID drove down border crossings. Nobody wanted to come here to work. If the current spike in inflation also crashes the economy again, we're going to see fewer people wanting to come to work. And that is a big driver of both immigration and then a little bit later deportations.
There is another factor in this, isn't there, Douglas? Because in terms of the economy, there is, by removing a lot of these people from the country, you're also removing a big part of the workforce that's working in agriculture and hospitality. One would imagine that the people who are still in those industries are feeling the economic impact of losing that source of employment.
100%. And this is why prices are such a volatile political issue for the president. It's things that people see and feel every day. Whenever they go to the grocery store or go to a restaurant or a movie theater or what have you, something has gotten more expensive and they go home and they complain about it. The president is in a real fight on this that he doesn't seem to be able to get a way out of, especially when you consider that Iran has now contributed to that as well. But you go to the grocery store and you get produce. It's more expensive now. That's a real problem for this administration.
Yeah, let's talk about another longer-term problem, Scott. Given the fact that the profile has changed and all of a sudden it's called NICE, not ICE, do you think that we're just, the Trump administration is essentially just papering over the cracks? Do you think that we are going to see the same problems with ICE, with raids, with the immigration policy that it has coming out in the future once we get past the midterms and so on? Or do you think that this is actually an answer, that this is going to solve the problem, at least as far as the Republicans are concerned?
I'm worried that it's going to get worse, because even though their focus hasn't been as much on people with criminal convictions as they said it would be, right? The share of people being deported who have no criminal convictions has been going up and up and up. The fact remains that a lot of the people that they've deported are people who were already in prison on criminal charges. If you try to push the level of deportations up and up and up and up, they're trying to effectively double the amount of immigration detention space, which would support doubling the number of removal seats. They're going to have to start dipping deeper and deeper into the pool of people who not only aren't criminals, but are very long settled in this country with lots of family ties. And so either there's going to have to be a shift away from increasing removals, or the people who are affected are going to be those who are more and more integrated into American communities.
Douglas, I just want to finish with you. We have about 50 seconds left, but I just want to get an idea. The images of families being broken up, of young children being taken away from their parents and so on, those are going to stay with people in the run-up to the elections. Do you think that this is going to be enough for the Republicans to just allow people to forget what happened, or do you think people are going to really be hanging on to those images?
I think by and large, unless there's another flare-up that, like we saw in Chicago or Minnesota, this is not going to be a top-level topic for voters. As the polling you showed, 7% say this is their number one issue. It's what people are experiencing every day in their lives that's going to drive voters. That's prices first and foremost. But ultimately, there is a risk that if one thing goes wrong, because everybody has a camera on them at all times now, that'll be filmed and can be seen by voters over and over again. And it's something that Trump is acutely aware of.
Douglas, we're going to leave it there. Scott, thank you very much indeed. I want to say thank you to Scott Shuchart, former head of policy at ICE, and Douglas Heye, Republican strategist. That's all from us. Back in a moment.
Yeah, so this place expected to be gone in the coming weeks, but of course that whole debate over immigration, over ICE, that will continue through November to the midterms and beyond. And of course we're going to follow every stage of that, every step here on This Is America, which you can catch Monday to Friday, 18:30 GMT, or if you're here in the United States, that is 2:30 p.m. on the East Coast. That's it for this edition. We'll see you again soon. Bye for now.